Okay, so we're going to start in just a minute, 1 minute, and okay, so good morning, everybody again. Welcome to everybody also online. We have nice attendance here online as well. We're continuing with our discussion, learning of Shacharit, weekday Shacharit. Last time we discussed the opening unit, i.e. Birkot HaShachar, the morning blessings. We spoke about the basic concepts and the first blessings that we have in that unit, whether starting from Modeh Ani, Birkot HaTorah, and all that kind of stuff. And we are up to the second unit, which is Psukei de Zimra. Just before that, kind of last time we went through very quickly the last couple of sections over there. So let's take a look at that very quickly. I'm looking at page 33 in the Koren, Parashat HaAkedah. So some people have the custom of reciting the Akedah, the story of Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac, as it recorded in Bereshit, in Genesis 22. The reasons behind that is kind of Kabbalistic. And the idea is, again, it's a preparation for Tefillah. Look at that as a preparation for Tefillah. As Kivyachol, as if we remind God that great test that a human being could have, Abraham, that was commanded to go and sacrifice his son. It's like I always think about it as before you go to your boss and you say, you remember, like, all the good things that I've done throughout the years, and it's kind of, so I have, this is my great grandfather, it's like, I'm related to him, and look what he did for you, and that kind of, he was willing to, and perhaps on a more, I guess, contemporary outlook, perhaps, is we want to be inspired by that. So I know it's kind of a heavy duty story, and there's a lot of, but I'm trying to crystallize from that the element of belief, the element of what does it mean to love God to that extent. And I want some inspiration of that before I go into Tefillah. And that idea, those ideas are actually found in the Tchina. So if you look at the page, at page 35 in the middle, there's a Tchina, there's a plea, follows that story, follows the recitation of that story, right? And it says, Master of the universe, just as Abraham, our father, suppressed his compassion to do your will wholeheartedly, so may your compassion suppress your anger from us, and may your compassion prevail over your other attributes, etc., etc. It's kind of a intro, I'm going to talk to you, God. I'm going to ask for things today, so cut me some slack. And I'm going to use every way to demonstrate that before I start, kind of like setting the stage. Okay, fine. Then Kabbalat Malchut Hamayim on page 35, towards the bottom of the page. Let's take a look at that. Rabbi Sachs has a beautiful idea here. The very bottom, the footnote. Person should always, right? That's what we say. A person should always be God-fearing, privately and publicly, acknowledging the truth and speaking it in his heart. He should rise early and say, Master of all worlds, not because of our righteousness do we lay our pleas before you, but because of your great compassion. And it's like a whole tefillah here that leads you, if you look already in page 39, into the Shema. So there's theological and historical reasons for that. We're going to go into that in a second. But look at the footnote on 35 in the bottom. A person should always, this whole section until who sanctifies his name among the multitudes, which is later, appears in the 10th century Midrash. Some believe that it dates from a period of persecution under the Persian ruler Yazdegerd II, who in 456 CE forbade the observance of Shabbat and the reading of the Torah. Jews continued to practice their faith in secret, saying prayers at times in ways that would not be detected by their persecutors. This explains the reference to fearing God privately and speaking it, meaning truth, in his heart. And the secret practice of Judaism. And the recitation here of the first lines of the Shema, which could not be said at a normal time. The final blessing, who sanctified his name among the multitudes, referred to the martyrdom of those who went on their deaths rather than renounce their faith. Okay, it's called Kiddush Hashem, as we know. So what do we take from there? There's, for me, living in the 21st century, this historical connection, I mean, it's interesting, it's nice, but a little bit less relatable, And though, so how do we make it relevant? How do we make it relevant? I mean, but I think that the concept itself is still relevant. A person should always be God-fearing privately and publicly, acknowledging the truth and speaking it in his heart. How many times do we see that and you just like, you want to go crazy because like, how dare he said that? Or like, you know, somebody acted. We see that stuff all the time. We see that stuff all the time. So that's the way I look at that. It's kind of like remind me, you know, tell the truth always. When you're private, when you're public, there shouldn't be any difference. Hypocrisy is something that we just don't accept. And it should serve as an inspiration for us as we approach tefillah. I mean, you can't approach tefillah, you can't start talking to God if you're not 100% there, whatever that means to you. Okay? I'm sorry? Not devoted, but it's like, you know, how many times we read about somebody who is like, oh, the person who goes to Minyan every day and he gives a lot of tzedakah, whatever, and then like, you know, they cheat in business or they cheat on their wives or whatever. It's like, come on. If I do it in private so nobody knows, come on, God knows. God knows. And if that's the case, that I acknowledge that, then what? Then, of course, there's only one way to do. There's only one thing that I can do, that I should do. Look at the end, at the bottom of 37, Lefichach, the last paragraph. Therefore, it is our duty to thank you and to praise, glorify, bless, sanctify, and give praise and thanks to your name. Happy are we. How good it is our portion. How lovely our faith and beautiful our heritage. Okay? And if that's the case, that you recognize that, and you recognize the fact that, it's yeah, it is me, it's for me, and what a beautiful thing. The only thing that you can do, what? To accept the yoke of heaven, which is the Shema, which is exactly what happens in the next page. Okay, so either because of its historical reasons, that the Shema, that we're not allowed to say the Shema at the regular time of the Tefillah, and therefore they had to do that early in the Tefillah at home. Remember, that section, all that stuff was still said at home in private. Or whether it's because it serves as some sort of an inspiration for us as we approach Tefillah. It really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Okay? There's another technical reason why we say the Shema here. Sometimes the halachic time to recite the Shema is going to pass, especially on Shabbat, for example, where we start Tefillah a little bit later. And if the day is short, and especially if your minyan is late, so by the time you're going to get to the Shema, there's a very good chance that you're going to miss the opportunity to say the Shema in its proper time. And yes, the rabbi gives you a time frame, because the Torah said what? You need to recite the Shema when you get up in the morning and when you lie down to sleep at night. So the rabbis figure out, okay, it means people, at least back then, get up at sunrise. So you have time basically from sunrise, it's kind of a window of 4 hours, 3 hours, but it's halachic hours, not exactly 60 minutes, whatever. So many times, if your tefillah starts at 9:30, there's a good chance it's going to be too late already. So the technical things that, okay, at least, so if you recite it here, you take care of that issue as well.
Don't we take into account that people's lives are a different lifestyle, and we have electricity and stuff like that, and we don't get up at 4 in the morning.
We do. It's just that the rabbinic authorities don't want to recognize that. Let's put it this way. Correct. That's a much bigger issue, but yes. By the way, Hasidut, the Hasidim dealt with that already a long time ago, and they said, you know what? Okay, it's interesting, it's guidelines, whatever, but don't go crazy with that. True story, it happened to me. We got married, right? Tila and I got married. It was a Thursday evening in Yerushalayim, and we ended up at the hotel, I don't know, like 3 o'clock in the morning, something like that, okay? Beyond exhausted. I don't remember much. But by the time I got up was 10-ish in the morning. And I'm saying, where am I going to find a minyan now? Well, Shibboleth was kind of, we were in the David Citadel. So the Shibboleth is kind of like far. I said, I'm going to go to the Kotel, see what's going to happen. And sure enough, I go to the Kotel at about 11 a.m. 11. And I see like a bunch of people that look very from all Hasidim, starting Shachrit Minyan. I said, today that works too. And I joined them. Never had a minyan at 11 a.m. for Shachrit, but so that tells you that. Okay. I'm going to talk about a little bit. We're not going to go into details with that. Page 43 starts in another kind of a subunit called the korbanot, Seder HaKorbanot. If you look at the conservative Siddur, if you look at the Reform Siddur, all that section is missing completely. Okay, we discussed it in other classes that the whole idea of the offerings, animal offerings, is something that the liberal movements are not yearning, not at least not davening for, and therefore there's no reason also to learn that, and it has no, it served its purpose perhaps in the past, but it has no relevancy to our days today. So what is it that we do with that? Why do we have that? We have a concept in Judaism, and then we, especially in Tefillah, we discussed that several times in the past, that it's called Unshalma Parim Sfatenu. It means the recitation of the korbanot, parim, bulls, the animals, recitation of that is as if I brought the sacrifice. Okay? It means there's a, I'm going to quote for Mishnah for a second. כל העוסק בתורת חטאת כאילו הקריב חטאת, וכל העוסק בתורת אשם כאילו הקריב אשם, וכן בתורת כל הקורבנות. The Mishnah is very, very clear. Anyone who learns the halachot, anyone who learns the text, anyone who, you know, it is as if that person brought that sacrifice. Yes, because of technical reasons, we are unable to bring those sacrifices. The temple is destroyed, and we're not allowed to bring sacrifices outside the temple. However, it is, you know, we have a replacement, so to say, at least a temporary replacement, in which we're obligated to learn that material, and it is considered as if we brought those korbanot. Okay. Some might think, okay, I don't understand why this is. What's the connection? If I'm, it's either you bring it or you don't. What is this like learning it? It's like, you know, if I'm going to take a if I'm going to take the manual of the car, which, you know, by the way, you have it in your glove compartment. Just saying, nobody looks at that, and then you're going to read it cover to cover. And then you're going to read like the theory books and everything. It is as if you actually drove from point A to B. No, so you know in theory how to operate a car. You know in theory how to change lanes. You know in theory all that kind of stuff, but it's still not driving the car and getting from one place to the other. So what is this nonsense, right? Got to understand something. That material, that concept comes right after the destruction of the temple. And you need to create a connection. You can't go from 1 to 100 immediately. The change is like too much. We go from a reality of bringing sacrifices to tefillah. That's already huge. Okay? Okay, you're not going to check the animal. You're going to be mumbling stuff. That's already like huge, right? So you need to create some sort of a connection, some sort of a similarity, something that you can work with that makes connection to the past. And therefore, it says ke'ilu amaram, the Mishnah says. It is as if you, you know, if you're learning it, it's like it's the same material. Yes, I know you can drive, but, you know, in order to drive, you need to know how to operate the car. And you need to know the rules of traffic, etc. The same goes here. So yes, I understand. You can't do the actual act, but at least the theory, it's something. Maybe. Okay, so there's got to be also a connection. Okay, so this is the korbanot, and this is so the daily. What we say that is, you see that the kiyor and the trumat hadeshen that was like this connected to the korban tamid, the daily sacrifice that was brought every day. 45, page 45 is korban tamid. These are the psukim. So it's not about recitation. At least the original intent was learning. Today we kind of mumble it. Well, in our show we don't even mumble it, but in places that do mumble it, they just mumble it. But I think the intent of the Chachamim was it's real learning. Why the Kohanim? They did that, but they did that on my behalf.
No.
But that goes back to what we discussed many times, that there was a transfer of responsibility, a transfer of ritual from a centralized location in the temple to everybody. So now everybody is a Kohen. Everybody is obligated in prayer. So it's like dancing on the two. It's that material, but everybody is responsible for that. Okay, so we have Korban Tamid, and you have the Ktoret, all the stuff that were brought every day, Sidur Ma'aracha, whatever. And then you'll see, like on page 51, you have the additions, like on the top, the Uviyom Shabbat, right? So that obviously applicable only on Shabbat or Rosh Chodesh, etc. That kind of stuff, the additions that we had. Now, so what happened? I was just involved with what? A real Torah study, right? This real Torah study. And therefore, go to page 55. It's a summary of the system of Torah study. Okay, if you look at that, that's a Braita. Rabbi Ishmael says what? That the Torah is expounded by 13 principles. You want to know how to learn Torah? According to here, these are the principles. Okay, so we have Kal Vachomer, an inference from a lenient law to a strict one, and vice versa. Okay, we understand that, but some of them are not so easy. That could be a class by itself. I don't want to go into that now. But right, if I say that I said to somebody, okay, here's $1 that would get you a gum. Would it? I don't know how much a gum costs. I don't know. One gum. I don't know. Right? So Kal Vachomer, if I gave you a $5 bill, that you can get the same gum. That's a Kal Vachomer. Okay? If I can lift the cup with the water, Kal Vachomer, I can lift the cup when it's empty. Makes sense? Okay? Fine. So Kal Vachomer is just the first of 13 principles. Now, why do I need to do that? Well, I was just involved with Torah study. So it's a kind of a summary. I go and I talk about the principles by which Torah is studied or learned. It's a kind of a summary at the end, like in summary, okay. And there's a beautiful explanation here again from Rabbi Sachs at the bottom on 55. This passage is included as an item of Talmud, defined in its broadest sense as deducting conclusions from premises, developing implications of statements, comparing dicta, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. It was chosen because it appears at the beginning of the Sifra, the halachic commentary to Leviticus, which is the source of most of the laws of offerings. So there's also contextual relations here. It also reminds us of the indissoluble connection between the written law and the oral law. Rabbi Ishmael's principles show how the latter can be derived from the former. You remember we talked about that a couple of times when the temple was destroyed and the rabbis made a couple of decisions, like, tefillah, for example, or Torah study. Torah study became like something that is everybody's obligated with. And they had principles of how to learn Torah, like what kind of material. Remember, we talked about the third of the time in Torah, third of the time is Mishnah, third of the time is Talmud, for example, right? That, and on top of that, you have to learn the prophets and writings, whatever. So the idea was the rabbis realized that Judaism is changing. Judaism is going to be very different than the times of the temple. And the authority is not going to be centralized in the temple. The head figure was the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. All that stuff is done. From now on, every rabbi, the Torah scholar, the teacher is going to be the important figure. The Kohanim, yes, okay, we give them honor, we give them the first aliyah, they go Birkat Kohanim. It's more rituals. Think about it. The Kohanim were the teachers, right? The Torah talks about this idea that the Kohanim don't have a nachala, they don't have a portion, they don't have land, their own land. Why? Because they're scattered all over the country. What's the point of that? So they are the teachers. Not necessarily teach you Aleph Bet, but all the halachic issues. People had tzarat. Okay? Who did they go to? The Kohen, whether it's in the house, whether it's in the clothes, whether it's in the skin. Okay? It's not that every time you had an issue, you went to the temple or the Sanhedrin. You can't do that. If you live in the Galil, you have a field. You need to leave pe'ah, for example, a corner of your field for the poor people so they can come and gather, Who's going to decide what's my corner? So you call the local Kohen and he said, hey, take a look at my field. Tell me where the fence goes. Okay? I collected my produce from whatever. I need to give to the Kohen, to the Levi, the Trumot, Masot, but whatever. It's like, I'm not very good at math. I need somebody to help me to do that. This is 1/10. This is 1/10 of the remaining. This is it. Okay? So the Kohen, it's like, it's similar to what we do today. You call the rabbi. You have a question, you go to, right? That was the role of the Kohanim. That this is why they were scattered all over the land, in every community. So the rabbis after the destruction of the temple, they realize everything is changing now. It's not the Kohanim that necessarily going to be the teachers. It's going to be those who know the material, and the material is not necessarily relates to the temple and to those laws that we can no longer observe, like Trumot Masot that go into the temple and stuff like that. And because the Kohanim going to lose their status or their role, it means that everybody needs to learn Torah. And Torah study became the most important thing. We talked about the Mishnah last time, the Talmud Torah keneged kulam. Right? Talmud Torah, learning Torah is above everything. Why? Because everybody needs to know how to navigate through life. So now the rabbis realize, okay, we're moving towards a different form of Judaism where Torah study is a big deal. And it's not going to be like the laws necessarily of the Torah only. It's rabbinic Judaism going to be. From now on, it's not going to be the Kohen Gadol, it's going to be the rabbis. The rabbis are going to make pshat, and they're gonna whatever, and they're going to learn and psak and whatever, and all that kind of stuff. And the rabbis are going to, things are going to change. People went to exile. What do we do with that? It's a reality. How you fulfill your Jewish life being outside of Israel? How many mitzvot do we have that are connected to the land of Israel? So what do you do in that? Okay, so it's new reality. You're going to have new teachers. You're going to have new curriculum, and somebody need to kind of crystallize this, and that's what Rabbi Ishmael did. He said, okay, it's not that anything goes. Okay, you're gonna draw from the Torah by those 13 principles. It was later on, it was changed and expanded and whatever. But you're gonna draw from the Torah in this methodology. And by using that, you'll come to give an answer and an explanation and reasoning for what are we doing now in situations that the Torah is not dealing with. I'm sorry? Right, deduction is one of them, absolutely. Okay? And by the way, this is the kind of like that thought, this idea is what happens in traditional Judaism. We never say, oh, this is not relevant or whatever. We say circumstances are different, whatever. What can we learn? We continue the same principles all the time. And okay, so I have a new situation. I'll give you an example. When electricity was invented. Electricity. What do you do with that? What do you do with that? So by the same principles, the same ideas that we have, whatever, oh, this is like, what do we use it? Use it for light. What do we use for light before? Fire. Okay, so we call it the tolada. That's the descendant of fire, at least in our use, right? So, okay, so the stuff that we do with fire apply here, and if so, how? That kind of like, right? We're dealing today, every day there's like new stuff. One of the hottest discussion today is what do you do with, how you call it, meat that is grown in lab. What do you do with that? Is it meat? Is it parv? When is, it depends on what exactly, if it's kosher or not, depends what animal it came from. Because like, if it's like a couple of cells, okay, so you got to work with something. So new realities are coming all the time. The tools with which you analyze this reality stems all the way from the Torah. And that's basically how halacha evolves, in theory at least. Okay, now, so this is why it's that. The very bottom, there's a tchina, there's a plea, which is, we're familiar, bottom of 55 or 54 in English. May it be your will, Lord, our God and God of our ancestors, that the temple be speedily rebuilt in our days, and grant us our share in your Torah, and may we serve you there in reverence, as in the days of old, as in former years. Why do we ask for the rebuild of Beit HaMikdash at that point? Because at this point, after finishing the learning of korbanot, we just like spend our time learning the laws of the animal sacrifice. So we feel that we can't do that. This is like this is where we feel it. I mean, when you go to business and you do your thing or whatever, you don't feel it so much. But now, it's like when you just finished learning the theory of driving, you feel, oh, I wish I could drive. Okay. Okay. So this is why we say it at that point. By the way, we're going to say it also at the end of the Amidah. Why do we say at the end of the Amidah? Because at the end of the day, we recite the Amidah because we don't have the Korban. So all of a sudden, oh wow, I just said like all this Amidah. Under different circumstances, I would have Bet HaMikdash at this point. Oh, I wish Bet HaMikdash was built. Okay. After that, we have a Kaddish, the Kaddish de Rabbanan, the Rabbi's Kaddish, page 57. So we know that there are 5 types of Kaddishim. We spoke about them briefly in the past. Half Kaddish generally, this is not 100%, generally serves as a divider or a sign that we switch from one unit of tefillah to the other. The full Kaddish, because of its line, Titkabel tzlaton uvaoton, may the supplication and the prayers of your people, Israel, be accepted. So that means there's always a connection between that full Kaddish. It's kind of like closes the unit that started with the Amidah. So it's always kind of connected to an Amidah, except for one case. But it's always connected to an Amidah. That's the full Kaddish. You have the mourner's Kaddish, okay, which is a whole thing by itself. And you have the Kaddish that we say, what we call a Kaddish Gadol, which is at the end of a tractate of Talmud, a siyum, or at the times of burial. We recite that. And you have what we call the Rabbi's Kaddish, Kaddish de Rabbanan. And the Kaddish de Rabbanan appears at the end of Torah study. Okay, because so all the Kaddishim differ. Okay, so they have pretty much the same text, but each one of them has like something a little bit different. So what is this that is different about this one? Is if look at page 59, Al Yisrael v'al Rabbanan v'al Talmidei Hon, to Israel, to the teachers, their disciples and their disciples' disciples, and to all who engage in the study of Torah. In this place or elsewhere, may there become to them and you great peace, grace, kindness, and compassion, long life, ample sustenance, and deliverance from their Father in heaven, and say Amen. Okay, so obviously that is connected. That's what makes it the Rabbi's Kaddish, that line. It's connected, and this is why it's called a Rabbi's Kaddish. It's connected to Torah study. And what the Rabbi do? To teach Torah. Okay, so at the end of Torah study, that's what we do. Like in the 7 a.m. or the 7:40 a.m. here, there's always like a little dvar halacha, something that Rabbi Pozi or Rabbi Top say, and after that, we go to a Rabbi's Kaddish. I daven at the 6 a.m. We don't have time for that. People daven at 6 a.m. They want efficiency. Between Mincha and Mariv, we do that as well. Sometimes after the rabbi gives it out on Friday night, we do that as well. So there's like after Torah study, a formal Torah study comes there. So we just had Torah study, right? And therefore we have the Kaddish, the Rabbanan, which brings us. It's also a separation. It's also a separation, but it's specifically after Torah study. We can talk about the Kaddish for a long time, but that could be some other time. I wanna kind of like deal with something that I think is a fascinating thing a little bit. What do we have after that Kaddish? Okay, after that Kaddish, we have the bottom of page 59, Psalm 30. And it's a fascinating case of the dynamics of tefillah. So first of all, if you look at different sidurim, you'll discover that it's not everywhere. Not everybody say it. And even if they say it as part of the Psukei de Zimra, it might be in a different location. So what is going on? In order to do that, we have to flip the page for a second. Actually, 2 pages. Page 63, that's the beginning of Psukei de Zimra. That's the next unit, okay? And it's a well-defined unit. Why am I saying it's a well-defined unit? Because it starts with a bracha, a blessing, Baruch Shamar, right? Technically, a bracha, a blessing, is defined by, if we say, a combination of the word Baruch. Usually, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Here it's at the end, but it starts also with Baruch, right? At the end of it, Baruch Atah Hashem melech mulal batishbachot. Okay, in the middle of 65. But so it starts with a blessing and it ends with a blessing, which is the Yishtabach. Fine. If you remember, we talked about it several times, that the practice was to surround biblical texts with rabbinic ones. So the Shema, for example, right? We have the Shema. Shema is biblical. When we have rabbinic, we have the blessings before, both in the evening service and in the morning service. We have the same thing. We have the Yotzer Or or Amari Barabim. We have Ahava Rabba or Ahavat Olam, and then after that, it's the blessing of redemption. And in between, we have the Shema, which is biblical. Okay. Another example is Hallel. For example, we have a bracha. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu v'tzotav v'tzivanu likro et Hallel. Then we go into Psalms, which is biblical. And then we have again a bracha, Yahalelucha, to Baruch Melech Mehulal Batishbachot. So it's a very, very ancient practice to surround biblical text with rabbinic ones. Most of the times it's blessings, not 100%, though, not always, but most of the times it's blessings, okay? And that is what we do in Psukei de Zimra. Again, we have Psalms, mainly Psalms. We have fractions of verses from other places in Tanakh, but it's all biblical. It's all biblical. And it's surrounded, at least in Nusach Ashkenaz, in our Nusach, it's surrounded by a blessing before Baruch Shamar and a blessing after, which is Yishtabach. So far, so good. Great. And if you look in Nusach Sfarad, which is the Hasidic Nusach, or the Edot HaMizrach, the Sephardic Sidurim, you will see that this particular Mizmor, Psalm 30, is included after the bracha at some point in Psukei de Zimra, which makes sense because we said rabbinic, biblical, rabbinic. So this is biblical, it belongs in the middle. So what does this Ashkenazim do with this biblical before? Okay, question is clear? Okay, so let's delve into that. So we need to understand that this is a later edition. It's not something that we see. This is it's a custom to include that in the morning prayers. Look, we start to see it in the 17th century, which is extremely new. I personally, for example, during the week, when I'm not leading davening, I use a sidur that is based on the old German sidurim tradition because, my grandparents came from Germany. And I don't have that. So not all communities, it's the standard Ashkenazi custom, but we start to see it only from the 17th century. Why do we have it? It's because it was sung in the temple to inaugurate the morning service. It is therefore, so it's like kind of like appropriate to start, with that. Fine. Another explanation says because it shows faith in God and therefore it's appropriate, right? If you read through that psalm, you'll see that it talks about great faith in God, and therefore it's good to start with that. But it still doesn't answer our questions. So there was a huge debate among Ashkenazi communities whether to include it, and if so, where. And one approach said, okay, we have a whole collection of biblical psalms and whatever, biblical text, so let's put it there. So we have a bracha, biblical, and then another bracha, rabbinic, all fine, and this is Nusach Sfarad. Sfaradim do the same thing. Ashkenazim said, no, that unit is already done. That's the way we've been davening for whatever, 300 years, 400, it's done. You can't add new stuff. You can't add new stuff. You want to add it? Let's do it before that unit. And this is how we ended up with that. Wait. So now, what is it doing by itself? This is why here in the Cong, they call it a psalm before verses in praise. It's introductory. Okay, fine. And guess what? After that, what we're going to see? A Kaddish, a mourner's Kaddish. The page of 61. So it's the sandwich between two Kaddishim. So first of all, it's surrounded by a rabbinic text. So that's number one. Number two, the Kaddish, remember, serves as a separator or a divider between the different units. So it creates separation before we start the next unit, Psukei de Zimra. And it's also public recitation of Tehillim, kind of by itself, which constitute mourner's Kaddish, which specifically is the mourner's Kaddish. We have the same idea in Kabbalat Shabbat, for example. Kabbalat Shabbat is public recitation of Tehillim. It's not part of a, tefillah. We talked about Kabbalat Shabbat as kind of a the youngest of our services, right? And because it's a public recitation of Tehillim, of Psalms, we have mourner's Kaddish after that. Now, it also serves a functional, so this is the idea, but there's also a functionality to that, the mourner's Kaddish. What is it? They realize, believe it or not, that people, even if they say Kaddish, they leave the shul early. Sometimes they have to, before the end. Why? They need to catch a train or whatever, or go to work, whatever that is. I have like a couple of people in my minions that I know, like, whatever, it doesn't matter what day, they always have to leave like, 5-10 minutes before the end. Why? Because they don't want to get stuck in traffic and they need to be early in the office, right? It's not a new thing. People used to do it. So the rabbi said, you know what? Let's put a Kaddish, at least a mourner's Kaddish here, because they're not going to be there at the end of the tefillah to recite the Kaddish. So either to recite or listen and respond to the Kaddish, makes no difference. So they put another Kaddish here, so it's functional, but it has like also practical, historical, contextual reasoning behind that. Now, why this particular psalm? Like, why all of a sudden, in the 17th century, people say, "Whoa, like, we need this." So here's the thing. What is the unit before? Korbanot. What happened? We learned the Korbanot, and what happened? If you're really into your tefillah, and the last thing, Shibaneh bet hamikdash b'meira v'ameinu, we yearn for the build of the temple. Think about those poor people in exile, horrible conditions. We're not talking about now. We're talking about like 2,000 years ago, and what that stuff is do to you? Depresses you. What am I supposed to be doing immediately after that? Psukei de Zimra. praising. It's the verses of praise. The Talmud calls it Hallel Shebecholim. It's the everyday Hallel. I'm supposed to be dancing. I'm supposed to be like, you're not going to see that at 6 a.m., by the way. Nobody's like dancing. Nobody's like, everybody's trying to wake up. What? I understand. I'm the only one that like sometimes like feel a little bit more because I already have a coffee. I have to have my coffee on the way here in the car. Otherwise, forget it. But it's you're supposed to be like and dancing and praising God and like but I was just depressed because of the temple. And you gotta understand, some people still lived in that times of the temple. So they've been through a major, major, major catastrophe. It's a Holocaust. I know. But I'm saying like there was a problem. How do I switch from one to the other? So back then, whatever. But at some point, people are like, okay, I gotta have something, a bridge. I can't, if I'm involved in the Torah study, I say, please God, build Beit HaMikdash, all that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, boom, I'm happy. I'm like, Baruch Shamar and whatever, hallelujah. Exactly. From Yom HaZikaron to Yom HaTzmaut, it's always a problem. So this is why this practice started, reciting this psalm. Because look at this. Look what it says. A Psalm of David, a song for the dedication of the house. Fine. I will exalt you. So this is all, but I'm not gonna read the whole thing. Just look at the end. Okay, page 60. You have turned my sorrow into dancing. You have removed my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, so that my soul may sing to you and not be silent. Lord my God, forever I will thank you. Right? He talks about God has the ability to change, to bring me from one place to the other, from one extreme feeling of mourning. He's sitting, King David's talking about, is sitting in sackcloth because he's more. What's the, okay, let me go one step back. When does King David writes this psalm? Exactly. When he's, so we know the story he had with Bathsheba. And because of he sleeps with Bathsheba is pregnant. But that's not King Solomon yet. There was a first child. And that child dies at short time after birth. And during that time, so the boy was born, I guess, sick already. King David is in depression. To that extent that Yoav, his chief general, comes to him and he said, you're the king, we're in a war, and you got to get yourself together. And nothing. He's like, he's in mourning. He's like, don't want to see anyone, don't want to talk to anyone, doesn't care about the war. He is depressed. And he pray like whatever, and he prays all the time to God, please save this kid, night and day. And the kid dies, the baby dies. And at that point, and it's a very dramatic scene. You can read it, like the book of Samuel records the whole thing. His servants like didn't know how to come and even tell him the news because they thought that he's gonna go crazy. But finally, they come and they tell him the boy has died. And he gets up, and he changes his clothes and says, it's time to go back to life. and goes to the battlefield and all that kind of stuff. It's the opposite that we would think he would do, right? At this point, you're supposed to go into mourning. And they ask him, what is going on? When the kid was sick, you were in mourning, you were davening the whole time, you were sitting on the floor, you tear your clothes, all that kind of stuff. And when you hear that the baby is dead, you get up. It makes no sense. And he said to them, well, while there was a chance to rectify the situation, I did everything I can. I prayed to God with all my heart. I did everything possible. But once the kid was gone, there's nothing I can do about that. It's sad, but there's nothing I can do about it. And I have a kingdom to run. And he got up. Unbelievable. This is where he wrote, at that time he wrote this psalm. You open my sackcloth, right? You were able, I mean, you, God, you have turned my sorrow into dancing. Dancing is obviously represent life. You have that ability, God. Even under those circumstances, you took that kid from me. It's mind-boggling, like, you know. But there's so much to learn about mourning, by the way, and psychology from that incident. You know, I always say we should learn from King David with that example. How many times you see people that they don't have the greatest relationship with their parents, for example, or the kids, or a sibling, or whatever, or relative, or whatever, or a friend, or any of that stuff. During their lifetime, they don't talk, or whatever, they fight, they have tension. Once that person dies, oh, that I'm in mourning, and they make sure they say every Kaddish, and they did it, and everything. They can I go to a wedding? I can't go to it. Can I go to that event? All that lot of questions. Where were you when the person was alive? You were too busy. What's really important? The customs of mourning, or actually the relationship? I know what they're doing. Now they mourn the relationship and all the missed opportunities. So perhaps invest in the relationship when it's still possible. Don't you see? I see it all the time in my life as a rabbi, as a clergyman. I see it all the time. People that are like, the relationship is not the greatest, whatever. But when it comes to mourning, they got to see there's no way they're going to miss a Kaddish. Seriously? That's the important thing? How about the 10 years prior to that, when you had a chance to actually work on that relationship? Were you running crazy to work on that relationship? That's what King David teaches us. I'm going to go crazy if I can rectify something, if I can help, if I can do something. When it's done, it's done. It's sad. It's heartbreaking, but there's nothing I can do about that. So isn't that a better thing that for me, and I'm not saying that one should disregard the laws of mourning, God forbid, but isn't more important for me, King David says, to channel my energy now to the living rather to the dead? What? There's nothing to do. So he's not, no, he's not saying that he's happy, but he said, God, you have that ability. to transfer me from one place to the other. And for that, I thank you. You don't let me crumble and drown completely. You took me out of that depression. I get it. Horrible circumstances. But you still took me out of that depression. And that's the inspiration. And that's why people in the 17th century or the end of 16th century felt that they need a bridge. If I'm depressed because I learned about the temple and obviously I don't know the times of the temple because I'm in the end of the 16th century, I'm in the 17th century, whatever. But I do a reflection on my life. And I'm in some, I don't know, little village in Europe. And I go through pogroms every Monday and Thursday. And life is terrible, or whatever that is. That was the reality for most Jews in exile. And so they said, like, you know, the yearning, the temple represents like yearning for a better reality. Israel, the temple, let's call it in our terminology, redemption, whatever that means. You're getting into I'm saying, I think for most people, they couldn't even break it down what it means. Political sovereignty, whatever. It's redemption. It's like, I remember, you know, my grandmother, you know, talking Mashiach Zeit. You know, times of Mashiach, times of the Messiah. It's redemption. It's like, everything is going to be wonderful, amazing. You know, you don't have to, like, whatever it is, utopia. Okay? So when you do reflection on your, it's like, I feel terrible because my life is here and now I'm supposed to go and praise God and be happy. I don't know how to do that. I need some. So this psalm gives us that inspiration. This psalm gives us that when you hid your face, I'm like afraid. And I turn to you and I beg you, right? And you took me, King David says, you took me from my lowest and you brought me back to life. So that serves an inspiration. So, okay, it's a transition. Now I'm back in life. I'm not I'm out of depression. I'm not happy yet, but at least I'm like not depressed yet. Okay, with that, I can start getting into Psukei Zimra. It's going to take me from here to here. And now I'm going to go from here. I'm going to go to here with Psukei Zimra. And that's what we're going to do next week. Okay. Nikki, is that okay?
I'm thinking, what about
Thank you, everybody.
for the relationship being